For many years, Sonic the Hedgehog has been the center of many debates. Are the classic or modern games better? Which Sonic voice actor is the best? Is Tails Gets Trolled the greatest piece of literature ever conceived? But among all of these debates, there is one that I find very interesting and very prominent. Should Sonic games have serious stories? In order to explore this argument, I want to bring one of the biggest Sonic experts that I know, my roommate Isaiah. Isaiah, your opening statement. This topic has been argued for years, and most of the time it goes back to the same points. Ugh, I can't take this plot seriously with a cartoon hedgehog fighting these eldritch gods. I thought that a game series with a villain called Dr. Eggman was supposed to be silly. Oh, and there's also the classic ones. Sonic plots should just be Sonic vs. Eggman, easy as that. We personally believe that these arguments about Sonic being a cartoony series, therefore it shouldn't be serious, are ridiculous because they basically boil down to that stupid mentality that animation is just for kids. And yeah, I'm gonna be honest with you, I hate that mentality. Animation can tell fantastic serious stories for people of different ages. Even cartoons, who are mostly aimed at kids, can still deliver fantastic messages and thought-provoking themes. And Sonic is no exception for that. Which is ironic, because one of Sonic's most popular cartoons of all time is Sonic Satan, a cartoon that always took itself seriously and had a darker tone than everything else Sonic had at the time, but was still beloved by many. So what's the difference here? Is it only okay when the main antagonist is called Robotnik instead of Eggman? Is it just nostalgia? Or maybe, I don't know, just maybe, it's telling a good story.
That said, that doesn't mean every Sonic game that takes itself seriously automatically has a good story. For example, Shadow the Hedgehog tries really hard to tell an ambitious story with several branching paths, but it offers the player too many disjointed and half-baked choices that all ultimately mean nothing due to the true ending making every single route in the game non-canon. Even its attempts to build upon the events of Adventure 2 fall flat, as the retcons of Shadow's origin don't add to his character in any meaningful way, nor does his development feel like a natural continuation of where he left off in Heroes. And that's not even mentioning how by trying so hard to come off as mature with all the mild cursing, it actually ends up feeling a lot more juvenile than the other games. Don't get me wrong, Sonic's always been edgy, but it comes off as cool because the games are usually written in a very sincere way, whereas Shadow the Hedgehog falls into the try-hard kind of edgy that people understandably make fun of.
Then there's Sonic Forces. Forces falls into a weird category where it wants to be taken seriously, but doesn't deliver in any of the cool stuff it sets up. Forces is a story in which Eggman actually succeeds in taking over most of the world. Sonic has been defeated and captured for several months, and there's a new seemingly invincible antagonist who has several past villains on his side. But it does absolutely nothing with these plot points. Eggman taking over the world means nothing, cause the characters recover it with next to no difficulty. Sonic's defeat doesn't carry any weight because he's rescued early on and isn't at all affected by supposedly being tortured. Tails has said to have lost it after he thought Sonic died, but is perfectly fine when he next appears. Infinite loses any threatening presence he could have had when his reason for being evil is so pathetic. And all those previous antagonists returning were nothing more than a cheap marketing gimmick, cause none of them are real and half of them are taken care of off-screen. That's not even mentioning classic Sonic, who's just there and doesn't actually contribute to the story at all. Everything Forces try to do feels either undercooked or like cheap pandering. All while it pretends to have this cool, emotional and deep story like the old games did. But no, it really doesn't.
And if you want to talk about the pinnacle of pretentiousness, there's the Ken Penders and Carl Baller's era of the Archie Sonic comics, and God, that could warrant a whole video of its own. Needless to say, they're just bad. Some of the most dull, convoluted, and downright weird comics I've ever had the displeasure of reading, all while they act like they're telling this epic adult narrative that gets so focused on all its garbage OCs, you'd forget you're even reading a Sonic comic if he wasn't on the cover. It's a miracle Ian Flynn was somehow able to turn it around and use the foundation these earlier comics laid to build something far, far better than the sum of its parts.
When you take all of that into consideration, you can see where the mindset that Sonic shouldn't have serious stories came from. But That doesn't mean the series hasn't had some great complex stories before, or that it is incapable of having them again. Sonic can have multiple characters tell their own stories. It can create lore to give context to what is going on. And yes, it can have a cartoon hedgehog kill eldritch gods and make it work. The problem was never the concepts, it was their execution. And there are countless examples of Sonic doing all of this well. In fact, when you look at discussions surrounding the dark age of Sonic, the one thing a good chunk of the fanbase has slowly come to agree on is that the stories of most of the 2000s games were pretty good.
The Sonic Adventure titles are some of the most beloved games in the series to this day, and their stories are a huge part of the reason why. They're both written similar to that of a shonen anime in terms of their tone, how they characterize the cast, and the massive escalation of their stakes. There's just tons of fantastic moments from these games, from Tails and Amy learning to be more independent, Knuckles discovering more about his culture and embracing his duty as a guardian, Gamma's journey of self-discovery and ultimate sacrifice, Shadow struggling with his past and overcoming his desire for revenge, and so on, all tightly woven between epic battles, sick action set pieces, and surprisingly hard-hitting emotional beats. These plots still hold up to this day and set the standard for the sort of stories the series would go on to tell for the next 10 years.
That's not to say every story needs to be that complex though. Unleashed, for example, tells a much more contained narrative following only a small handful of Sonic's usual cast and the newcomer Chip, but it still delivers on the grand scale of fighting Eggman's troops in space and taking on eldritch gods that you'd expect from the series by this point. But despite the literal earth-shattering stakes, the game lets Sonic slow down, see the sights, and enjoy every stop along the way of this world adventure. It gives both him and the player a lot of time to appreciate the cultural diversity the globe has to offer, as well as to get attached to Chip, which... actually, the two kinda go hand in hand when you think about it. If you know, you know. So because the game takes its time to let you get invested, that's why the ending hits as hard as it does. The game earns every emotional scene it has, and that's why this is still considered a good Sonic story.
And then there's the Storybook series. Regardless of how you feel about their gameplay, the one thing they undeniably delivered on is their stories, and what makes them so damn good is how Sonic's characterization is at its peak. You see, what makes Sonic so likable isn't just that he's cool, it's how he inspires everyone around him to become their best selves. He doesn't need to learn a lesson or grow as a person because he's already living his life to the fullest, and so he often serves as a force to impart whatever the game's moral is onto other characters as well as the player themselves. There's examples of this as far back as the classic games with how he helps Tails embrace who he is and come into his own. But for my money, it doesn't get any better than Sonic and the Secret Rings and Sonic and the Black Knight. These games tackle more complex and mature topics than you'd expect to find in a mascot platformer, such as dealing with abusive relationships, processing grief and loss, and even grappling with our own mortality, and yet they handle them with a surprising amount of tact and make them digestible for kids and adults alike, all while seamlessly blending them into some of the coolest interpretations of classic fairy tales that I've ever seen. I played Sonic and the Black Knight when I was just 11 years old, and scenes like this have stuck with me to this day and helped me get through some of the toughest moments of my entire life.
Every world has its end. I know that's kind of sad, but that's why we gotta live life to the fullest in the time we have. At least, that's what I figure.
Frontiers, for me, is what gives me hope for the future of the franchise. Despite all its flaws and issues, and despite not having the most amazing story in the series, it's still one I thoroughly enjoyed because it had everything I like from the series. It's serious when it needs to be, but it never forgets to be fun every now and then. There's a lot of context to what is going on. The old characters were treated with a lot of respect and actually amounted to something. And even the new character Sage was a fantastic addition to the franchise. This game's story felt so confident and genuine for me that by the end of it, I was so emotionally moved. After more than 10 years of having nothing but baby stories, Frontiers show me that Sonic can still deliver that part that makes it so unique. Now, we aren't saying that these stories don't have any faults, but even at their worst, they're still memorable, entertaining, and confident in themselves. Hell, even Sonic 06 managed to achieve some of that. Yeah, you can bring up the time travel inconsistencies, the half-baked romance, and all the other wrong shit about it. We are not gonna debate that. But Shadow and Silver stories? They're honestly cool. Shadow's character arc in this game is beyond fantastic and a proper evolution of how the previous games built him up, while Silver's optimism and growth made him so likable and so endearing that to this day, he's still one of the most popular characters in the franchise, even if his gameplay style is hated. Even if Sonic 06 is considered to be one of the worst games of all time, there are still glimpses of greatness to be found in its story that show why Sonic's such an appealing series. Even so, with this we don't mean to imply that simple stories can't work, because there's plenty of great examples of this in the classic series, especially in the case of Sonic 3 and Knuckles. It tells a great story with memorable set pieces, a complete character arc for Knuckles, and some cool lore for the Chaos Emeralds, and it achieved all of this without a single line of dialogue. There's also the likes of Sonic CD, Sonic Mania, the Sonic Advance series. These are all easy to grasp stories from beginning to end that don't feel the need to overcomplicate stuff, but are still great in their own right. We admit, yes, there is appeal in simple Sonic stories, and said stories can work. Very well, in fact. But people have to realize that even these stories aren't as simple as just having Sonic vs Eggman over and over again. They'll still have a little something that makes them special. Whether that be introducing new and likable characters, adding something interesting to the world, or at least having memorable moments. Because if they lack any of that, then all you have is a simple, boring story that doesn't achieve anything, which is pretty much what happened during the 2010s.
If you ask me, the biggest problem with the stories from the 2010 Sonic games is how patronizing they feel. Like, there's nothing inherently wrong with having simple Sonic vs. Eggman plots. We've already listed a bunch of great examples of those. But they come off as so ashamed to even acknowledge that the series has gone beyond that without bringing it up through self-deprecating tongue-in-cheek humor just to appease the critics at the time. Generations should have been a loving celebration of Sonic's entire history up until that point, but because reviewers said no one likes Sonic's stupid friends, none of them have anything of value to say or do. Even Sonic and Tails themselves don't reflect on their past adventures in any meaningful way. Just basic snide comments like, this is kind of familiar, or, oh man, it sure was weird when we did that. It just screams a lack of confidence, and when its own story is so painfully bare bones, it all comes off as a desperate attempt to win back detractors of the series instead of appealing to the fans. You know, the people that actually like and buy these games. As for Colors and Lost World, they feel squarely aimed at kids. And I know what you're thinking. The 25-year-olds are going to complain that the children's mascot character is trying to appeal to the children. But what I mean when I say that is that it's written with the lowest common denominator in mind. Instead of coming up with a cool, exciting, and funny story that can stand on its own so that kids and people of all ages can enjoy it, the writing style for Colors and Lost World feel like they're trying to parrot the kind of generic, forgettable garbage that airs between good cartoons. Because in the end, kids will just watch anything, right?
Baldy nose hair.
Baldy nose hair! That's the best thing I've heard all day!
In these games, Sonic and his friends are flanderized at best and completely mischaracterized at worst, losing all of their likable traits and character development so they can be turned into a bunch of jackasses that stand around and spout off a bunch of unfunny jokes nonstop. I'm not saying every game needs to have a meticulous care for continuity or anything like that, but these are characters with a rich 20-year history. They shouldn't have to relearn something as basic as respecting and trusting each other. That's why I hate it so much when people use the argument that Sonic is a cartoon when they insult the more serious stories in the franchise, because they clearly only view cartoons as mindless drivel to keep kids distracted instead of an entire entertainment medium. And that's not just coming from a grown-ass man who cares too much about video games, by the way. I was 12 when Sonic Colors came out, and even back then I felt like this game's writing was treating me like I was an idiot.
Okay, this part is 100% improvised, we're not following a script here. But just to conclude, there is one thing I really want to bring up. When people say that Sonic shouldn't have serious stories because it's a cartoon hedgehog and all of that shit, it reminds me to when people say, oh, you cannot write a good story about Superman because Superman is all powerful and he's always good, like, you cannot make any of this interesting. But I don't read comics, but every single huge Superman fan that I know of says that, no, there are great Superman stories, but you just suck as a writer, that's the thing. So like, yeah, I think that can also apply to Sonic.
No, absolutely. Like, it's really just a lack of imagination at the end of the day, because if you're not willing to come up with something that suits the character, then you're going to fall back on writing something else. You know, writing something that doesn't suit them, writing something
The baby's writing.
Yeah, baby writing.
Those
like you said
stinky
earlier.
rotten. Fuck that.
No, yeah. And even just beyond that, like, people often like give Sonic more shit than they would for any other character.
Yeah, like just because it's Sonic.
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
oh,
exactly.
It's Sonic. Oh, it's cool to mock Sonic.
Mm-hmm.
Because say there was this example you talk about.
Kirby.
Kirby.
Because
Yeah.
like with Kirby, like people would be like, oh, Sonic kills demons and gods. Like, that's cringe. Like, he's a cartoon. But then you have Kirby, a character that's literally for fucking babies.
Yeah, literally, I love Kirby games.
No, I love Kirby. Kirby's great.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, Kirby is for like the youngest of young children. Like, you could play that as like a 4-year-old and still beat a Kirby game half the time, you know?
Yeah.
But at the end, like, oh, when he fights a demon or a god or something, it's badass. And no, when Kirby does it, it's cool.
You don't get it, dude. The eye bleeds.
Oh,
the eye
man.
bleeds.
No, the point is that it's supposed to surprise you, that you wouldn't expect it, even though he does it every single freaking game.
Every single game we
time.
fight a
But
god.
when Sonic does it, oh, that's weird. A cartoon shouldn't do that.
It's okay when Nintendo does it.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
even with like the Mario RPGs, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
I love the Mario RPGs too. And
Me
it's
too,
cool
yeah.
when you see Mario, like, you know, kill the Shadow Queen from the 1,000 Year Door. That's great. That's fucking badass. Or Super Paper Mario. But Sonic is not allowed to?
yeah, it's stupid. It doesn't make any
Again,
sense.
I want to say, it really goes back to that reputation from like the 2010s, even earlier than that, when YouTubers were like, Sonic shouldn't do this kind of stuff. Sonic friends fucking suck. We only want Sonic. Like, yeah, it's so stupid. Just because it's Sonic doesn't mean he shouldn't be able to try it, you know? Because he has succeeded in the past.
Absolutely, and you shouldn't pigeonhole any character or IP to only be one specific thing, because then you get nothing creative, nothing interesting.
Yeah, because again, it's like we said in the video, there's good modern complicated stories, serious stories, and there's also good simple stories.
Exactly.
But like, put effort on it. Like, the conclusion of this is get a good writer. That works with any sort of media, but like, if you want to tell a good story, tell a good writer that knows how to use its source material.
Exactly. As long as you get someone who cares about the source material and is a competent writer, the story's going to be good, whether it's complex or not.
Yeah. And that's all we have to say. So, anyway, thank you for hearing us rant about Sonic. You can tell we're pretty passionate about this, and now we want to ask, what do you guys think about it? Do you agree with us? Do you think Sonic should be more serious every now and then? Or do you prefer the simplistic nature of the cartoon hedgehog? Let us know in the comments, and will you do that? Thank you so much for your time. We really hope you enjoyed the video. And if you want to support the channel, you know, liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing, or Patreon, especially Patreon, because I have to pay the rent.
He really does, I can confirm.
I really need to pay the rent. That will mean so much to me. Have a wonderful day and take care. We'll see you hopefully next time.